UK Independence Party, joins us live from London. Nigel, we have to get your reaction. The people in the streets of Miami celebrating, reacting to the death of the Cuban dictator. What's your reaction this morning?
Well, Castro was proof, wasn't he, that state socialism makes people poorer and makes the world a more dangerous place. And, you know, it may be over 50 years ago, but let's not forget the Cuban Missile Crisis was the closest that the world came to nuclear catastrophe. So whether it's in good taste to celebrate someone's passing or not is another issue, but I kind of get it.
Yeah, and Nigel, as a leader of the Brexit movement, you, of course, just recently met here in New York with President-elect Donald Trump, and during the campaign here in the U.S., he talked about rolling back some of the executive actions by President Obama in terms of opening relations a bit with Cuba. What's your sense about how the incoming U.S. president may approach all of this?
Well, it's tough to tell because, you know, was Fidel Castro behind the scenes still pulling the strings, or was his brother, you know, actually genuinely running it? I just think that if Cuba, I think what President Trump, when he's in, will want to see is Cuba actually now, with the passing of Fidel Castro, moving into the 21st century, becoming democratic, and then I think there could be good relations.
Sir, do you think that it's possible that with a transition from President Obama's presidency to Donald Trump, that you could see, for lack of a better word, a reset, perhaps the world community coming together to actually try to help Cuba come into the 21st century, to provide them more economic freedom, to bring capitalism there? There's a lot of potential there. It's a beautiful island. And I could imagine that on the world stage, you could actually exert some pressure.
Yes, I mean, let's face it, Cuba's got some wonderful natural resources. It could be a very rich and successful place, but it has to open up. It has to become democratic. It has to recognize the total failure of Marxist communism. I think with all these things, what's really interesting about Trump's approach, and we saw it during the campaign when he flew down to Mexico, is this is a president who spent, you know, half a century in business. He spent his life sitting round the table, meeting people, you know, and thrashing out deals. And I think the change of style will be that Trump will show himself to be open to go and meet all sorts of people, whether on the face of it they look friendly or not. And I think that will be a very good, positive thing, and it will cast America across the whole world in a very positive light.
Nigel, to your point, I wonder whether, despite some of the tough rhetoric from Donald Trump in the campaign to perhaps win Florida, as Dana and I were talking about before the show a few moments ago, whether or not now, as you say, he becomes president and as the master negotiator starts saying, well, you know, one of the Castro brothers is now dead. The other is in his 80s. As you say, this is a failing regime anyway. And maybe he will have more of an open door to Cuba and think that American capitalism flooding into Havana may be something that brings the freedom that you're talking about.
I think Trump's instincts will say absolutely all of those things. You know, he knows that the free market works, you know, provided it's not dominated by giant Wall Street banks and multinationals. But if you allow genuine flows of capital and you let people work hard and make money, it equals success. And goodness me, didn't America see that under Reagan 30 years ago? And if that happens in America, and if that message gets spread to Cuba and elsewhere, then that's good for the whole planet.
One last question on that, because there has been this belief in the West that economic liberalization or economic freedom or capitalism will inevitably bring about political reform. We hoped that would happen in China and when opening up there, but the Chinese regime has found a way to benefit the state and grow themselves and still have oppressed the people. Do you think you're going to get real openings in Cuba without demanding political reforms? That's the criticism of the deal that Barack Obama cut through executive action. So what more can be done to press the Cubans for political freedom?
No, I think that's right. I think the capital flows have to follow that political reform. And you know, that is where a President Trump or his team has got to go and explain to prominent members of Cuban society, come on guys, you open this up, the money will come, your people will be richer and have better lives. And I think that's right. I think that free flows of money can be a great benefit to mankind. I think the problem in the West that we've got is that just so much of our politics has been dominated not by the idea of free market capitalism, but by the growth of political corporatism. The big banks and the multinationals, virtually in Europe particularly, virtually owning the entire political process. And that's what we here are trying to break down after the Brexit vote.
Absolutely.
And Nigel, I wonder if we can widen the lens a little bit about this Trump transition. There's been quite a bit of discussion here, particularly among conservatives in the United States over the last couple of days about who might be the Secretary of State. And I wonder, as you sit in London and think about sort of the global reaction to Donald Trump coming to power, the idea that Mitt Romney, one of his big foes, might be the Secretary of State, or will it be Rudy Giuliani, who's been a loyalist? There's a great debate there. And now we're hearing, well, maybe there might be a third way. There could be a General Petraeus or John Bolton, the former ambassador. What's your sense there, and having known Donald Trump and sat down with him just very recently, about what might be his approach in terms of the world stage?
Well, of course, he has two things to do, doesn't he? On the one hand, he has to keep faith with the people that voted him in and on his commitments. But on the other, he has got a healing job to do in the Republican Party. You know, remember, around about the time of the second debate in St. Louis, you know, most senior Republicans ran for the hills and left him high and dry. So he has to do a little bit of both. He's got to try and get that party back together again. My sense is that the Secretary of State role is so crucial that he needs to have somebody who will recognize that missions like Libya, that missions like Iraq actually made the world a less safe place and led to a vacuum into which ISIS leapt. So I think that to whoever he picks and whatever the view they took on those previous military interventions, he needs to get people now who recognize just knocking out dictators because you don't like them actually can make the world worse and not better. And he also needs somebody who recognizes that whatever we think of Putin as a human being, the West really needs to stop provoking Russia and start sitting around a table and having a conversation with them.
Well, Mr. Farage, you talked about widening the lens, widening it even further. You know, you have the moment of Brexit, you have the moment of Trump's election, then you have the implementation, which is the difficult part. And there's plenty of roadblocks that have run into the, you know, actually leaving the EU. Just like the press and others here criticizing what they call disarray in the transition, what are the techniques you see from opponents of these movements that they're using to sort of stymie progress on a Brexit or stymie progress on a President-elect Trump?
Well, we've got Jill Stein attempting legal actions to try and overturn results. But I have to say, you know, I'm not taking that too seriously. And ultimately, Trump's victory is such that he will be in charge of the people, you know, steering America forward. So there'll be criticisms. There'll be elements of the liberal media who will never accept him, but he's in charge. Our position here is a bit more serious in that the people spoke, but just in the last few days, we've had a former Labour Prime Minister Blair, a former Conservative Prime Minister Major, we've got the current leader of the Liberal Party in this country, all saying they want another referendum because they want to overturn the result. And I could say, well, they're just sore losers, but actually it's a bit more serious than that here. You know, we have got people in our political establishment in Britain who look disdainfully upon the view of ordinary voters. So we are going to have a much bigger battle to get Brexit in place than Donald Trump is going to have to put in place his policies.
Nigel Farage, you certainly covered the globe for us. Some tough talk for both the Castro brothers and Jill Stein. I take my hat off to cover that gamut like that.